The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
Mr. President, thank you. Throughout this process, I've witnessed firsthand your appreciation for the vital role of the American judiciary. No president has ever consulted more widely or talked with more people from more backgrounds to seek input about a Supreme Court nomination. Mr. President, I am grateful to you, and I'm humbled by your confidence in me. Thank you.
Oh, boy, I thought we were going to have to get a bunch of Thai SEAL divers to get him out of his ass, you know, like somebody very adept at cave diving with lots of oxygen. Oh, he crawled right up there, didn't he? This Brett. We're going to have a Supreme Court justice named Brett, everybody. Holy crap. You know, reality TV is getting really, really, really lame. Oh, my God. Had a scripted ending, didn't it? Had a scripted... So this is the guy that the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society picked for Donald Trump and handed to him and said, this is the one that we want, and you shut up about it and just nominate him. People are wondering now, just as I was, if, Justice Kennedy made some sort of a deal with Donald Trump that he would retire and allow Donald Trump to have a Supreme Court nominee if he decided ahead of the time that he would pick another one of his law clerks. I mean, I'm not kidding. This is serious. And I have to read you something. Well, there are a lot of things that this man has written, this Kavanaugh dude. You know, we kind of knew it was between him and Amy Coney Barrett, who was like a cult member. Okay. So in a weird way, we got, I won't say lucky, because at least you knew what you were getting with Amy Coney Barrett. You knew you were getting a woman who comes along with her handmaid. I mean, she literally has a handmaid. Her husband has a head. She has a handmaid because she's part of this cult that only began in 1971. Her husband's parents and her parents were, like elders in this 1971 cult thing. But what's really, everybody went to, let me just say, I have to read you just one of his law review articles, because there's one law review article that I swear to God reads exactly like the 1933 Enabling Act. And for those of you who are, loyal clients of mine, constant listeners, whatever you want to call yourself, newcomers, just listen, because the people who have been together with me for the longest time know that I've talked about the Enabling Act as being the key moment in the rise of the Reich. Okay? It was the key moment. Because, Hitler, I know you're not supposed to talk about Hitler. I have no idea why we're not supposed to talk about him, because if we don't talk about him, then we'll never remember what we need to remember, so it never happens. But what Hitler was able to accomplish was he created a chaotic situation. He created a fire. He actually set something on fire and then pretended to be a fireman. And he was going to rescue the people of Germany from this chaos that he actually created. He set fire to the Reichstag, which is their Congress, okay? And then after the building burned, he convened a meeting of the people he chose from the Congress, from the Reichstag. And he announced to them that he was going to put up for a vote, sort of a constitutional amendment. And of course, he needed a 2/3 majority to do this because, Germany was a constitutional democracy before this. And so he decided that he was going to keep out the people likely to vote against his amendment by force. Literally by force, with SS and SA and all these, different, let's say, patrols, you know, and agencies. And he would keep those people away. He would jail them for a brief moment in time so that the vote could be taken. Anyway, what it was it was an act that said that the president, Hitler, had awesome powers and that he could say whatever he wanted to say. He could do whatever he wanted to do without Congress, because this was a unique moment where they were facing complete and utter chaos, because somebody had set fire to Congress, to the building. And of course it was him. He created this chaotic thing. This law, the Enabling Act, actually gave the most awesome powers to Adolf Hitler, the chancellor, to not have to go to Congress to declare war, to not have to go to Congress to use his agencies to round people up or to separate families or to separate children from their parents, right? I got to tell you that last night they presented this Brett Kavanaugh dude as like this fabulous family man with his two beautiful daughters, and he coaches their basketball, which I think is a good endeavor for him. He should go coach wrestling at Ohio State because they have a problem there with pedophiles. So, you know, maybe he would do, best as being a coach of girls basketball at Ohio State. I don't know. But then again, maybe not, because think of what would happen if one of those girls got pregnant. Right, Brett? But he was with his family last night, and, Trump needed a picture-perfect moment, and so he brought this guy in with his two little girls at the same moment that Trump is separating little girls and boys from their families. You see, if Brett Kavanaugh's daughters would have been born in the wrong part of Nicaragua... Right, sorry, dude, sorry. Sorry for you. I know you love those girls, but, too bad for you. And this Kavanaugh dude is such a swamp creature, which is what we were talking about briefly yesterday, about how the swamp is not being drained and how, if they picked Kavanaugh, he was such a swamp creature that it almost seemed as if he was a foregone conclusion, right? Because Amy Coney Barrett was just too culty. And so now they're saying, well, Trump really feels like he's going to get 2 or 3 more picks, and Amy Coney Barrett would be great to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Can you imagine that? But last night, there was some discussion and some questioning of Raj Shah, who is, Sarah Honey Boo Boo's backup when she can't lie, when she's lied so much that she must take a nap. And he comes and he pinch hits. And he was asked whether or not there was a deal with Kennedy to pick Kavanaugh, whether or not it was a foregone conclusion. Because, when I listen to Brett Kavanaugh go, no president has shown such a reverence for the jurisprudence. Trump, the only thing Trump knows about the law is that he's been sued about 1 billion times and that he settles most of those lawsuits, but that he knows that if he could pick his judge, it would all have worked out different. It all would end up different. See, this is why when he attacked Judge Curiel, it was such a big damn deal, because it was a heads up that if I become president, I'm going to pick judges that will do for me what judges won't do for me, and that's disregard the law and rule in my favor because I'm rich. So anyway, check this out. Check out this questioning of Raj Shah and whether or not there was a deal with Kennedy.
There's the suggestion, and again, I don't know whether it's true or not, that there's some kind of deal made that Anthony Kennedy said, you know what, I'll retire if you can promise to me that Judge Kavanaugh would fill my shoes. Or the converse of that would be that the White House made clear to Justice Kennedy that if you go, Judge Kavanaugh, whom you respect and know well as your clerk, he will be your replacement. Did anything like that happen?
John, again, I'm not going to read out private conversations that may have occurred between the president and Justice Kennedy, but the president didn't make a decision until Sunday, in which he called Judge Kavanaugh. And again, the judge's record speaks for itself. He's been on the president's publicly disclosed list since last November, and it's very clear that in over 300 opinions, he is an individual who supports, applying the law to the facts and as it was originally intended.
So you're not, I just want to be clear because I'm going to move on. You're not ruling that out, though. You're not ruling out that those conversations did take place.
What I'm saying is that Justice Kennedy can speak for himself.
Okay.
He's not ruling it out. Wouldn't say that the fix was in and that Kennedy made a deal. And you know what's really interesting is that Kennedy's son over at Deutsche Bank was Trump's personal banker when no other bank would lend to the Trump organization because it had gone bankrupt 6 times. Kennedy's son would, and then Trump becomes president and Kennedy says, oh, well, now I can retire because the president will play ball with me and I can pick my successor. Not the president, not the Senate, but I can. This is so sick. This is so completely... and then the other question they asked was, have you read Kavanaugh's description of presidential powers? Now, this goes back to what I was saying that happened in Germany on March 23rd, 1933. March 23rd, 1933, Hitler created a crisis, which Trump loves to do, especially with fire. He likes to set fire to things and then pretend that he's with the firemen and he's here to help you, right? So this is exactly what Hitler did. Hitler decided that he was going to set fire to the Reichstag, and the newly elected members of the German parliament, the Reichstag, the Congress, they had a meet in an opera house in Berlin. And Hitler sold them on this idea that they needed to pass the law, this law, the Enabling Act it's become known as. But then it was very friendly. It was called the law to remedy the distress of the people. To remedy the distress of the people. And what it allowed Hitler to do was to enact laws, including ones that violated the German Constitution, without any approval of either house of parliament, without the approval of anybody. He could just do what he wanted to do. And this is the expansive view of one Judge Kavanaugh. This man has been everything from Ken Starr's henchman. Yeah, he worked for Ken Starr. He investigated Bill Clinton. He told the prosecutor, Ken Starr, that he needed to ask the sex questions. He needed to ask them, like out loud, whether or not a cigar was used as a sexual implement, whether or not Bill Clinton had ever ejaculated into Monica Lewinsky's mouth. I mean, really discuss. And then he was like one of the prime authors. And so we were talking about the Starr Report, which was just complete porn. It was complete and utter porn. He investigated Vince Foster's suicide because the conservatives were saying he had been murdered by Hillary Clinton. The one good thing, Kavanaugh found that no, Vince Foster did commit suicide, but he didn't stop there. He wanted to get the papers of Vince Foster's attorney. He wanted the attorney-client privilege documents between Vince Foster and Vince Foster's attorney. And this is the single case he ever argued to the Supreme Court. He wanted to undo attorney-client privilege in the case of Vince Foster's attorney because Vince Foster was dead. And the Supreme Court rejected him, including Anthony Kennedy, 6-3. That is the only case he's ever argued before the Supreme Court. But he seems to be popping up everywhere there's a conservative crisis. Everywhere the conservatives need somebody to bring a lawsuit to expand corporate giving, or to do away with attorney-client privilege when convenient, or to say that the president has awesome powers to, declare war when he hasn't gone to Congress. I mean, this man is just so malleable.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, The Randi Rhodes Show.
Is the president aware of Judge Kavanaugh's position when it comes to investigating the executive, investigating the president? Is he aware of Judge Kavanaugh's writings from 2009 when Judge Kavanaugh said the indictment and trial of the sitting president would cripple the federal government, rendering it unable to function with credibility in either the international or domestic arenas? Is President Trump aware of that?
So the president and the White House are aware of all of Judge Kavanaugh's public record. But what we are focused on is that if you look at his opinions, you look at his writings, there are some that would emphasize greater power for the executive, some that would limit the power of the executive, some that would put a ruling on one or another side of a specific issue. But the constant strain through all of the rulings, through all the opinions, through all the writings, is an individual who interprets the law and the Constitution as it was written.
Does the president agree with the 2009 writing?
I haven't asked the president about that writing, but I will say that overall he finds Judge Kavanaugh, through his many opinions, through his many writings, through his decade plus of service now in the D.C. Court of Appeals, to be an individual of the highest caliber, an individual who is more than fit to serve on the Supreme Court.
All right, so here's the question that he's being, this is the document that he's being asked about. Kavanaugh wrote an article calling for Congress to exempt a sitting president from criminal prosecution and investigation, including from questioning by criminal prosecutors, defense counsel, in a criminal setting and in a civil setting. Now, remember that I just told you that he was part of the Starr prosecution. He was Kenneth Starr's right-hand guy. So he didn't have this problem with, subpoenaing a president to testify in a civil matter, the Paula Jones matter. He didn't have a problem subpoenaing a president to testify before a grand jury, okay? He didn't have a problem then. All of a sudden, he becomes Bush's advisor, doubly his advisor, and he writes and during the Obama administration, he writes this law review article saying, the president really should be immune from questioning in a criminal matter. The president really should be immune from, indictment. The president really should be immune from being called to question in a civil matter. Because, I had time to think about it. And what I did with Ken Starr, while it was fun and dirty and filthy, that shouldn't apply any longer to other presidents. It was a one-time fun thing I did. That's what I'm saying. This man, where he stands, depends on where he's sitting. This man is such a swamp creature. He is he was born in Washington, D.C. He went to Georgetown Prep in Washington, D.C., went to Yale. He went to Yale again for law school. Then he goes, works for the Justice Department. Then his whole life, his entire life has been serving Republican presidents, telling them anything he wants to hear, telling them anything that they want to hear, and finding a way in the law to make it so. He's a dangerous, dangerous little mild-mannered, he's one of those, he's got that dull, useless look, right? He's one of those scary dudes. So basically what we're going to have here is an obstruction of justice. Here's what he wrote. I'm going to read it because if I don't know that you ever will. And it's in the homework today at randyrhodes.com. It's frightening. Okay, this is what, Now remember, he was Ken Starr's henchman. Okay, I should show you the questions that he wrote for Ken Starr to ask. I'll read them for you after because this is more important. But the questions he wrote to ask are so vile. Did you? I'll just tell you. Did you ejaculate in Monica Lewinsky's mouth twice? Did you ejaculate in a trash basket while Monica Lewinsky was? Okay. This is what he says. This is his writing, not mine. First, my chief takeaway, this is about providing sitting presidents with a temporary deferral of civil suits and of criminal prosecutions and investigations. This is why Donald Trump likes him, okay? This is everything, because Donald Trump has picked a 53-year-old man to sit on the Supreme Court for the whole entire it'll be way into the middle of this century that this man will sit on the court, serving Republican ideologue presidents for that long, changing the way everybody lives by giving a president the most awesome powers that you could possibly imagine, and finding ways to convince people that he's actually a strict constitutionalist, construction, whatever you want to call them. He isn't. He isn't. Okay? First, my chief takeaway from working in the White House for 5.5 years, and particularly from my nearly 3 years of work as staff secretary when I was fortunate to travel the country and the world with President Bush. That's W. Now, remember, W thought he could spy on you without warrants, surveillance. Remember? And they went to battle against James Comey. Just remember, okay? Is that the job of president is far more difficult than any other civilian position in government. It frankly makes being a member of Congress or the judiciary look rather easy by comparison. The decisions the president must make are hard and often life or death. The pressure is relentless. The problems arise from all directions. The criticism is unremitting and personal. And at the end of the day, only one person is responsible. There are not 8 other colleagues as there are on the Supreme Court, or 99 other colleagues as there are in the Senate, or 434 other colleagues as there are in the House. There is no review panel for presidential decisions. Really? Congress isn't a check on the president? Okay, if you say so. See, there is no review panel for presidential decisions and few opportunities for do-overs. The president alone makes the most important decisions. It is true that presidents carve out occasional free time to exercise or read or attend social events. But don't be fooled. The job and the pressure never stop. We exalt and revere the presidency in this country. Yet even so, I think we grossly underestimate how difficult the job is. At the end of the Clinton presidency, John Harris wrote an excellent book about President Clinton entitled The Survivor. I've come to think that the book's title is an accurate description for all presidents in the modern era. Having seen firsthand how complex and difficult that job is, I believe it is vital that the president be able to focus on his never-ending tasks with as few distractions as possible. The country wants the president to be, quote, one of us who bears the same responsibilities of citizenship that all share. But I believe that the president should be excused from some of the burdens of ordinary citizenship while serving in office. This man is about to tell you that the president is above the law. Trust me. This is not something I necessarily thought in the 80s or the 90s. Like Americans at that time, I believe that the president should be required to shoulder the same obligations that we all carry. But in retrospect, that seems a mistake. Looking back to the late 90s, for example, the nation certainly would have been better off if President Clinton could have focused on Osama bin Laden without being distracted by the Paula Jones sexual harassment case and its criminal investigation offshoots. You were the number 2 in those investigations. Oh, okay. To be sure, one can correctly say that President Clinton brought that ordeal on himself by his answers during the deposition in the Jones case, if nothing else. And my point here is not to say that the relevant actors, the Supreme Court in Jones, Judge Susan Weber Wright, and independent counsel Ken Starr did anything other than their proper duty under the law as it then existed. But the law as it existed was itself the problem, particularly the extent to which it allowed civil suits against presidents to proceed while the president is in office. That is still the law, just so you know. With that in mind, it would be appropriate for Congress to enact a statute providing that any personal civil suits against presidents, like certain members of the military, be deferred while the president is in office. The result the Supreme Court reached in Clinton v. Jones, that presidents are not constitutionally entitled to deferral of civil suits, may well have been entirely correct, But that is beyond the scope of this inquiry. Now, I want you to remember these words. That is beyond the scope of this inquiry. Or, we don't deal with that here. Or, we're not going to comment on that now. This is a tool. This is a technique that this man, Kavanaugh, uses in almost all his writings. Okay? I don't think that Donald Trump ever sat down and read any of his writings except for this one, and only a portion of this one, and only that portion of this one. However, in reading his dissents about pre-existing conditions, about contraception in Obamacare, religious freedom, dissents where he does not agree with the majority or the mainstream thinking on any, he finds a way to twist himself into a pretzel where he says, but we're not really dealing with this issue here, but let me just say that if I were the one in charge, I would do it the other way. I would give the president a deferral from civil suits. I would give the president a deferral from crimes and criminal investigations, having to answer questions in criminal. That's a technique, a tool, a device that he uses in everything, so that he can avoid questioning for his Supreme Court nomination, which he surely knew was in the cards for him from the time he was 38 years old. This man knew. And I'm just wondering, I don't know, this is kind of conspiratorial, I will say, but Skull and Bones, anybody? Yale Law School, Yale undergrad, anybody? Because John Kerry was a Skull and Bones guy, and W was a Skull and Bones guy, and W's dad was a Skull and Bones guy. This guy is a Yale guy, both undergrad. I mean, really? He just kind of always knew. Anyway. Then he quotes the court in Jones, where they say in Jones that the president must answer to civil suits. The president is not above the law, either in damages claims, in civil, or if he violated criminal law, as in Whitewater, okay, which was a nothing burger. But he said, but the court in Jones stated that Congress is free to provide a temporary deferral of civil suits while the president is in office. Again, this is something he does all the time. He provides a roadmap for the court or for the Congress to create a law, especially to fit a Republican president who finds himself in the same pickle that President Clinton found himself in. Change the law. Congress may be wise to do so, as it is done for certain members of the military. He restates that. Deferral would allow the president to focus on the vital duties he was elected to perform. Congress should consider doing the same, moreover, with respect to criminal investigations and criminal prosecutions of the president. In particular, Congress might consider a law exempting a president while in office from criminal prosecution and investigation. Meaning, if this man is seated on the Supreme Court and Mueller is still doing an investigation into criminal wrongdoing by this president having to do with being a traitor to this nation, taking foreign money and using foreign help in order to spread propaganda, suppress voting, all that. If it comes to light that the president is a traitor, this man is saying, hey, don't worry about it. We'll find 5-4 that you're too busy to be prosecuted for criminal activity, that you are indeed above the law because you're the president. This is his writing. Criminal investigations targeted at or revolving around a president are inevitably politicized by both their supporters and critics. As I have written, well, too bad. It's, there's politics in politics. Too bad. Oh. He wrote, as I have written before, quote, no attorney general or special counsel will have the necessary credibility to avoid the inevitable charges that he is politically motivated, whether in favor of the president or against him, depending on the individual leading the investigation and its results. Yes, because Ken Starr was politically motivated to take a land deal and explore a consensual affair that the president had with a young girl. And you wrote lewd questions to ask the president in order to have the president impeached and removed. Ken Starr was a politically motivated pick. He was a politically motivated person. The entire Whitewater land deal was a nothing burger, and yet he ended up investigating sex in a civil suit brought by Paula Jones, who was completely and totally used by the Republican Party. Okay, then he says the indictment and trial of a sitting president would cripple the federal government, rendering it unable to function with credibility in either the international or domestic arenas. No, that's why we have secession. That's why we have the order of succession. That's why we have rules that if a president becomes incapacitated or unable to fulfill his duties, the vice president becomes the president. And if the vice president can't do it because he's also implicated, then you get the Speaker of the House over there. Okay, I mean, this man just makes crap up. Then he writes, such an outcome would ill serve the public interest, especially in times of financial or national security crisis. Even the lesser burdens of a criminal investigation, including preparing for questioning by criminal investigators, are time-consuming and distracting. Oh, too bad. Like civil suits, criminal investigations take the president's focus away from his or her responsibilities to the people. And a president who is concerned about an ongoing criminal investigation is almost inevitably going to do a worse job as president. Oh, tell it to Richard Nixon. One might raise at least two important critiques of these ideas. And this is enough. See, he's going to do it again. The first critique, right, is that no one is above the law in our system of government. I strongly agree with that principle, but it is not ultimately a persuasive criticism of these suggestions. The point is not to put the president above the law or to eliminate checks on the president, but simply to defer litigation and investigations until the president is out of office. That's all he deals with. That's it. That's his entire statement on the president is not above the law. Well, you know, the point is not to put him above the law, although we are going to put him above the law while he's president. So you could have a murdering president. You could have a president that literally kills his own people. You could have a president that suspends elections. You could have a president that enables, right, that you enable to do whatever he wants to do and not face any criminal prosecution or any checks on his power. But he doesn't deal with that here. He just says, the point is not to put the president above the law or to eliminate checks on the president, but to simply defer litigation and investigations until he's out of office. And that's it. That's his only comment. Then he deals with a second possibility. You know, the second concern is that a country needs a check against a bad behaving or law-breaking president, but the Constitution already provides that check. If the president does something dastardly, the impeachment process is available. Not a single prosecutor, judge, or jury should be able to accomplish what Constitution assigns to Congress. Moreover, an impeached and removed president is still subject to criminal prosecution afterwards. In short, the Constitution establishes a clear mechanism to deter executive malfeasance. We should not burden a sitting president with civil suits, criminal investigations, or criminal prosecutions. The president's job is difficult enough as it is. And the country loses when the president's focus is distracted by the burdens of civil litigation or criminal investigations and possible prosecution. That's it. End of his little treaty here, his treatise on, how the president is not above the law because, yeah, but what if you have, the Enabling Act, right? And the president of the United States or the chancellor of Germany is able to have his cheering majority Ignore the president's wrongdoing, just like we have now. Ignore the president's law breaking. Ignore the president's racism. Ignore the president's outrageous behavior. Ignore that the president is being sued by 21 women. You know what I mean? What if, all of a sudden Congress just became a cheering section for the president and impeachment wasn't a possibility? Are you saying that the American people, when it is proven to a grand jury that the president is indictable, that he has committed criminal offenses, that a grand jury finds indictable, the president should get a pass because Congress is his handmaiden, and you now are going to be the Supreme Court. You're going to be his handmaiden there too, and you're going to say it doesn't matter what Mueller. In fact, Mueller does not have the right to even investigate people around the president. That's what he wrote there. That investigations even around the president are too distracting. This is a very dangerous man. This is a man who finds ways to argue whatever is convenient at the moment. He found ways to argue that Clinton should be called to question, but not this president.
Call in, connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844.
561-270-3844. I'm a little sort of stunned at the way this is all played out. If you look at the entire list of 20 or so people that he had on, the one person the president could find on that list that would be most assured to rule in his favor, should many of the things you're describing come before the Supreme Court, is this judge. He picked the one guy who has specifically written that a president, in fact, should not be the subject of a criminal investigation, which the president is right now.
Yes.
So this seems to be, of all the people, the most self-serving person he could choose in order to protect himself from this criminal investigation.
CNN reported earlier this evening that factor about Judge Kavanaugh, his writings on whether a president can be indicted, about a president's potential susceptibility to obstruction of justice charges, that those writings by Judge Kavanaugh were overtly considered and reviewed by the White House team that was advising the president on making this pick. If that's true, if it turns out that the president chose Judge Kavanaugh for this nomination, in part on the basis of what he said about whether President Trump conceivably could be indicted, would that itself be a factor for confirmation here? Would that be disqualifying in your mind?
Well, first of all, I have no doubt that this president, who seems to be very concerned about himself, didn't see that as a shining pearl within the picks that he had and the criteria that he looked at. But I've been saying emphatically before this, and now I will be saying with even stronger voice, that we as United States Senate, forget partisanship or what have you, if a respect for the Constitution, to avoid a constitutional crisis, we cannot let this confirmation process go forward, especially now that we have someone that has clearly said that they have a strong opinion should any of those issues come before the Supreme Court. We know now that the ideas that you said are not settled law. Whether the president can pardon himself, whether the president can just dispense with a criminal investigation. A lot of these issues could come right before that justice that now he is 100% certain will have his back.
It's very sad and sick. Please don't pull my show down, Rachel, but it's very sad and sick. I mean, it's unbelievable. And it's not just prosecution. It's questioning the president. It's questioning anyone around the president, that the president and any action that the president takes is protected activity, even if it's criminal, or even if somebody suffered damage at the hands of this president. They have no standing, no ability, no recourse for grievance redress in front of a court of law if this president does what the president says he thinks he can do, and that's shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. Then while the president is president, according to Kavanaugh, you'll just have to wait till the president isn't president anymore. Kavanaugh also deals with term limits in this paper. This is a 33-paged paper. He talks about how nominees for the Supreme Court ought to be handled. The reason why Mitch McConnell doesn't like Kavanaugh, and he doesn't, you know, Mitch McConnell did not pick Kavanaugh. Mitch McConnell was not advocating for Kavanaugh. The Bush family was, and the Swamp Things were. This is deep, deep Federalist Society, 40 years of slouching toward Gomorrah, 40 years of preparation, 40 years of overturning the laws that we rely on to get our grievances redressed, to have privacy in our own bodies, to have privacy in our own marriages, to have all this stuff. The Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation have been working 40 years to take away from us. That's the smallest part of it, because that is what this guy is about. But the biggest part is to relieve a Republican president, not a Democratic president, because Kavanaugh went after Bill Clinton with a vengeance. So did Ken Starr, and Ken Starr was his boss. And he started with Ken Starr when he was only 38 years old. This is a man who graduated Yale Law School, went to Yale undergraduate, could have had any job he wanted. And what job did he want? He wanted to be Ken Starr's henchman. Because it was in the cards for him to follow this path. It was told to him. Embed yourself. You're a termite now. You work for us. This is sick. And Mitch McConnell doesn't like him because he disagreed with Mitch McConnell's holding up of Merrick Garland. He says the law ought to be changed, or the Supreme Court ought to make rules that say you have 180 days and then you have to confirm or deny somebody confirmation. Right? And why did he say that? Because Merrick Garland is the Chief Justice on the circuit that Kavanaugh serves on. Merrick Garland's from the D.C. Circuit Court. That's where he was, and that's who Obama picked. Kavanaugh is also from the D.C. Circuit. I mean, it just depends on who his friend is. He could find anything for anybody. This man is just so slimy and slippery. He's just such a lawyer. He was a fixture in conservative politics all these many years, okay? But this one paper that I'm sure Trump was shown by the Washington swamp creatures, by the elite, by the Federalist Society, by the Heritage Foundation types, they made a point of showing Trump this section of this 2009 Minnesota Law Review paper that he wrote. Trump looked at nothing else. You know that. Trump looked at nothing else. He was given a piece of paper by the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation when he was running for president. And the reason why they all stay quiet, and the reason why they put up with his craziness and his racism and his warmongering and his lying and his, oh, we got our bodies back, and I'm going to repeal and replace Obamacare, but I'm not really going to replace. They put up with all of this because of the Supreme Court, the elite, okay? The elite. Here, look, I'll show you. I'll show you like the right-wing ideologues. They are not happy about this guy, Kavanaugh. They know where he came from. They understand. They understand that this was the swamp in Washington, that this is the elite, that this is a completely manufactured candidate by the Skull and Bones Society and people like that.
Judge Brett Kavanaugh, what are your thoughts? Do you know him?
Well, I do know him. There were four forces going on at once. So the religious conservatives wanted Judge Barrett, the former Notre Dame law professor from the 7th Circuit in Chicago. The academic conservatives wanted Judge Kethledge, a sort of mirror image of Justice Gorsuch. The president's sister wanted her colleague, Judge Hardiman, whom some believe was originally the president's first choice. The Washington establishment, sometimes known as the swamp, wanted Judge Kavanaugh, and the people around the president wanted Judge Kavanaugh, led by Don McGahn, the White House legal counsel, longtime friend of Judge Kavanaugh, and they prevailed.
But are you suggesting?
So you're saying it's a swamp pick?
Yes, I'm saying that this is. I am disappointed in the president because this is not the type of person that he said he would pick. Justice Gorsuch was. This person is at the heart and soul of the D.C. establishment against whom the president railed. Now, look, that's just my criticism. He's pro-life. He's pro-gun. He's pro-police, which rankles civil libertarians.
Great. He's everything. He's everything all wrapped up in one. He's the swamp monster. He is a product of the swamp. He's Don McGahn's friend. Remember, Don McGahn picked a guy who blogged on a Ku Klux Klan website. Remember, Don McGahn picked the guy who'd never conducted a deposition, not once in his life. Remember, Don McGahn's picks, Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana, embarrassed them so severely because the president was sending, Don McGahn's friends and Don McGahn's wife's friends. Yeah, this is another Don McGahn, but this is also a Justice Kennedy in the bag. I'll resign, I'll retire, I'll give you the glory of picking another one, but you're going to pick this guy. This is a Heritage Foundation. This is a Federalist Society. This is a swamp monster. This is a man who will maneuver the law, who will actually, his philosophy is to serve the Republican Party above everything else, including the Constitution. This is a man who is super, super, super dangerous. Oh, and here's Rick Santorum, okay? He's going to say the same damn thing. They bowed to the elite. This is an inside job.
Well, I think that Donald Trump said he was going to energize the base with this pick. I don't think he did that. I think a lot of the folks in the base were sort of turned off to Brett Kavanaugh for the very reasons you heard discussed a few minutes ago. I mean, he is from Washington. He is the establishment pick. He is the Bush pick. He is someone. I mean, his father was a judge. His mother was a judge. It just seems like Trump in this case just bowed to the elite in Washington, and I think that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way. I don't think it's going to be a game changer, but I think it's not a yeah, let's go get him kind of moment for Trump.
Great. You know what? Because he's not reliable. That's why the uber right wing who exist on religious liberty things and Roe v. Wade, that's why they're not happy, because this man is not reliable. This man will fit any issue into any package that the president of the United States, if he's a Republican, wants it to be massaged into. He will find a way to say it's all okay for the president to do whatever he wants. If the president wants to declare war, well, the Constitution actually says only Congress can do that. But if the president wants to, I'll find a way. I'll find a way to say, well, it was an act of terror. Or, well, it's an expansion on the use of military force. So if Congress gives the president an authorization to use military force, or an AUMF, right? An authorization to use military force in Afghanistan. And now the president wants to go all the way over there to Iraq and the Middle East, where he was in Central Asia before. And now he wants to move the war. Well, sure, the Constitution says he should go to Congress, but I won't require it. Well, if the president shoots somebody on Fifth Avenue, sure, it's a criminal offense, but if he has a friendly Congress that's willing to look the other way and they won't impeach him, you can't ask him any questions about it. You can't have a prosecutor asking questions. You can't have a prosecutor, saying, but look, we have him on tape doing this. No, it's too distracting. It's not a good thing. We shouldn't do that. Should wait till he leaves office. He also deals with term limits. He talks about perennial campaigning and how presidents are always campaigning, and it's not good. It's not good. So he says that the president should have one 6-year term, in his opinion. Now, it was pointed out to me when I said term limits were going to come up that this 22nd Amendment of the Constitution is already, term limiting the president to 2 4-year terms. Yeah, but Brett Kavanaugh thinks that maybe 1 6-year would be better, so maybe he would rule that way, too. As far as Roe v. Wade goes, who knows? He's a gun nut. Oh, he loves guns. And we know this because he lives in Washington, D.C. And they had an assault weapons ban, and he argued against it.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent partisan mosaic that is America. From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe it. Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
Do you believe Judge Kavanaugh is an extremist?
I believe he is far, far right on so many issues. The ones I've mentioned, and particularly alarming, is, of course, the one about presidential power at a time when we have a president who just routinely overreaches and doesn't respect rule of law. But I also, on gun rights, on environmental rights, on LGBTQ rights, he is way, way, way to the right of the American people. He is not a mainstream judge, and that's why the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation, groups that are not in the mainstream, have chosen him, have pre-selected him. Had Donald Trump chosen someone from off the list, which I urged him to do when he called me, we might be in a different situation. But the fact that the president campaigned on these things and created his own litmus tests, and then the fact that he let two groups that vehemently, strongly, fervently believe in these two things makes it pretty clear that this is an extreme nominee.
Yeah, he is pretty extreme in this way. He will find a way to give whoever his, Lord and Master is at the moment, this Brett Kavanaugh dude will, whatever they want. That's what's so frightening about him. And of course, he brings his own ideology to the table, which is very, very pro assault weapons, very, very pro high capacity magazines. We know this because he was a dissenter when Washington enacted its assault weapons ban. He said, well, the American people have come to rely on assault weapons, and so you can't take them away. But when it comes to Roe v. Wade, if you make the same case to him and you say, well, American women for the last 40 some odd years have come to rely on birth control and have come to rely on Plan B and have come to rely on abortion services if their contraception fails, he says reliance isn't, part of the rule of law. It is. But, and that's why he's able to make the case for assault weapons. Well, Americans rely on assault weapons, so, you can't take them away. He was wrong. He was a dissenter. He's always a dissenter, and he always gives a roadmap for future cases in his dissent. This is what he does. He's a snake. You remember the president used to read The Snake? Oh, dear fair woman, you knew I was a snake before you let me in, right? Right? To characterize Muslims as somehow snakes. No, this man is a snake. Kavanaugh is straight out of the swamp. When you look at the fact that he has been involved in every major Republican issue throughout his he graduated law school in 1990, and all through the 90s and all through the 2000s, he's been a reliable Republican henchman, so that he was the person that wrote the 10 questions for Bill Clinton. Here are the 10 questions he wrote, okay? This was in a memo. This is what Kavanaugh did in the 1990s with regard to Bill Clinton, who he now says, okay, his position now is no president can be questioned in a civil suit or in a criminal prosecution. And you can't question anybody around the president because even that's too distracting because the president needs to be the president, right? This is his theory. But he writes this memo to Judge Starr, Ken Starr, and copied. This is what they're talking about with the emails. His emails, he's got so many of them. So here's one of his emails. It's to Judge Starr, and CC'd is all attorneys, meaning everyone in the independent counsel's office, Ken Starr's office. It was dated 2 days before Bill Clinton was to go and give testimony to the grand jury. Now, of course, Bill Clinton they were going to subpoena Bill Clinton, but then Bill Clinton voluntarily agreed so that he could negotiate that he wouldn't have to go to the grand jury. He could do it from his office, and he could do it with his attorneys present, and that it would be through closed-circuit television and played for the grand jury, his questioning, by Ken Starr's staff and Ken Starr himself. So Kavanaugh was one of those, and he wrote in a memo to Ken Starr and all the attorneys, quote, "After reflecting this evening, I am strongly opposed to giving President Clinton any break unless before his questioning on Monday, he either 1, resigns, or 2, confesses perjury and issues a public apology to you, Ken Starr. I have tried hard to bend over backwards to be fair to him. In the end, I am convinced that there really are no reasonable defenses. The idea of going easy on him at the questioning is thus abhorrent to me. The president has disgraced his office, the legal system, and the American people by having sex with a 22-year-old intern and turning her life into shambles, callous and disgusting behavior that has somehow gotten lost in the shuffle. He has committed perjury, at least in the Paula Jones case. He has tried to disgrace Ken Starr and this office with a sustained propaganda campaign that would make Nixon blush." Kavanaugh then listed 10 questions that he wanted Ken Starr and his staff to ask. And these are the questions he listed in this email. Okay, 1. If Monica Lewinsky says that you ejaculated into her mouth on 2 occasions in the Oval Office area, would she be lying? 2. If Monica Lewinsky says that on several occasions you had her give you oral sex, made her stop, and then ejaculated into the sink in the bathroom of the Oval Office, would she be lying? 3. If Monica Lewinsky says that you masturbated into a trash can in your secretary's office, would she be lying? This is the same author of what I read to you. He writes in 2009 when Bush is president that no president can be questioned, right? They didn't ask these precise questions, but they did ask very, very similar ones. One of the questions in Bill Clinton's testimony to the grand jury was, if Monica Lewinsky says that you used a cigar as a sexual aid with her in the Oval Office area, would she be lying? After that questioning, Kavanaugh patted on the back the man who actually was chosen to ask Bill Clinton the questions. His name is Solomon Weisenberg. He was one of the attorneys that questioned the president. So Kavanaugh pats him on the back and congratulates him for asking the sex questions. And then when Ken Starr wanted to publish the Starr report, which did get published and sold, I own a copy of it. It's like I was saying this the other day. The thing weighs a ton, and it's full of prurient sexual details like that. The thing is like it's almost as good as an Anne Roquelaure novel, which for those of you who are not in the know, screw 50 Shades of Grey. That's like kindergarten, really. That she fluttered her eyelashes. Oh, F you. You want the real thing? You want the real thing? You want Anne Roquelaure. Anne Roquelaure is really Anne Rice, the Lestat author, the vampire author. But she also had a pen name where she wrote porn. Great porn. Anne Roquelaure. Ken Starr gave her a run for her money in the Starr report, okay? And then when the Starr report came out, Kavanaugh was so embarrassed that he said, I object to the prurient tone of the Starr report, arguing that the level of sexual detail was not needed. But he was the author of these sexual questions. That's what I'm telling you. This man is a snake. And then in 2000, he was on the Bush v. Gore team. Guess which side he was on? He was on the George Bush side of Bush v. Gore. And he was part of that legal team that argued to the Supreme Court to make an exception and for just one time only ignore states' rights. Florida had the right. I lived here. I voted in Palm Beach County. I was at ground zero in 2000, okay? And Florida has a right to choose the manner in which it chooses its electors, right? The slate. And that's in the Constitution. And he argued against the Constitution, and he said that in this one case only, The Supreme Court should end the recount, stop counting the votes, and screw states' rights, and the Supreme Court should insert itself and choose the victor. And along party lines, the Supreme Court voted for Bush. Kavanaugh was there for that. Kavanaugh was there for the Elian Gonzalez case, which is very interesting because that was also 2000. And Elian Gonzalez, in case you don't remember, he was a little boy who got on a raft. And, you know, we had back then the wet foot, dry foot policy, which meant if you could make it 90 miles from Cuba to the United States, never mind the, Guatemalan trek, never mind the 2,000 miles, through Mexico, never mind that. If you could get 90 miles from Cuba to the United States, you could get your foot dry on Florida sand, you could stay here. That was wet foot, dry foot. Doesn't exist anymore. Obama rescinded it. But that was what we had, okay? So Elian Gonzalez and his mother set out to Florida from Cuba. His mother died at sea, but Elian made it here. Now, because of wet foot, dry foot, Elian shouldn't have been deported. And that was my position. Kavanaugh also had that position. But of course, now he's for separating of the children. Kavanaugh actually took Elian Gonzalez's case pro bono, arguing what I was arguing in 2000, that Elian should stay here. But in the end, Elian Gonzalez was deported back to Cuba, where he still lives today. He's a grown man now. He's, probably 24, 25. Then after the Elian Gonzalez case, he worked on the Bush legal team for the Bush v. Gore. And then once Bush was president, Kavanaugh became, he was sent to the White House counsel's office. Don McGahn's job now is White House counsel, right? So he was sent to work there from 2001 to 3. And then from 3 to 6, he was staff secretary to W, which means he briefed W. He was the person who was in charge of briefing W, which means he knew there were no weapons of mass destruction. And then Bush picked Harriet Miers, his secretary, right, to go to the Supreme Court, which failed. And then in 2003, as a thank you very much, Bush appoints Kavanaugh to the D.C. Circuit. And he languished in the Senate for 3 years, never got a confirmation until 2006, and he gets confirmed. And in 2009, he's saying all this stuff about the president is untouchable. And the president, if he wants to warrantlessly wiretap people, he should be able to warrantlessly. You can't even, have criminal charges brought against him. And if the president wants to torture people, let the president torture people. We'll deal with it after he's out of office. And if the president wants to shoot people on Fifth Avenue, or if the president wants to separate women and children, or if the president wants to do this, then you can't bring any civil suit against the president, nor can you bring criminal charges while he's president. Torture. He actually said he could torture.
The Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
Senator, do you believe that President Trump selected Judge Kavanaugh because of Judge Kavanaugh's views on presidential power and his position in that law review paper where he said that presidents should not be subject to prosecution while in office?
I certainly believe he was the judge probably of the 25. They all would repeal Roe. They all would repeal ACA. But on this issue, the Mueller issue, which came up after the vetting by these two groups, he's probably the most extreme. And it wouldn't surprise me if that was very important to Donald Trump, knowing Donald Trump, and I have no proof. Do you think he didn't inquire about this either directly or indirectly, knowing Donald Trump? What do you think?
No, this is obviously an inside game, and this is a game that was played by Justice Kennedy. This is a technique that Justice Kennedy uses also, where he says, well, gerrymandering, we're not, even though the Constitution, one man, one vote, right? And the gerrymandering dilutes one man, one vote. And that is easy. That's an easy call. And almost every Supreme Court has said one man, one vote is the law of the land. And that, right? But Kennedy said, nah, we're not going to deal with this here. It could go back to the states. Because now they're all about states' rights with voting. But in 2000, they were not about Florida's right to select the manner in which we chose our electors, right? So these are shapeshifters. These are people who, where they stand depends on where they sit. And the answer to that is always, if you stand for nothing, you will fall for anything. And that is who Kavanaugh is. He is a man who has embedded himself like a termite, like a cockroach, inside the Washington swamp, inside the elite. I promise you, well, I can't promise you, but I suspect he's been, a Skull and Bones member for years and years, and that this group of, this small group of Yale the small group of Yale attendees form this secret bond. It's like the Masons or, just a secret society, and they plot and plan about how and when and where they can undo the democratic principles of the United States in favor of the corporate elite, the moneyed elite, the wealthy elite, because they have so much disdain for the people, the little people. They just have disdain. They don't think we're capable of self-governing. They know best. They know better. They know what women should be doing. They know what gays should be doing. They know what, the president should be doing. They know when a war is a good war. They know when a war is a bad war. And they will find a way. They will find a way. This is like unfreaking believable. This is sick. It's so sick, and it's so obvious what's going on here.
Look, I sure wouldn't take a bet on Leonard Leo's handpicked list to keep Roe, for sure. And the other one is the Heritage Foundation. They have dedicated their existence to repealing ACA, pulling the government out of health care. The president promised that in his campaign as well. So these are two issues broadly popular with the American people: women's reproductive rights, keeping health care, particularly pre-existing conditions. I will oppose this nominee with everything I've got. And I'd make one other point, particularly for you guys, which is this. You are worried about President Trump's overreach. So am I. This nominee has stood more, certainly before he became a judge, for presidential overreach. He has said the president shouldn't be investigated. He's gone so far as to say a president, if he declares a law unconstitutional, doesn't have to obey it. How is he going to react if Mueller needs a subpoena, if Mueller needs some other action? So for all these reasons, this man should not be on the bench. And I believe if we can prove these 2 points to the American people, that he will repeal Roe and women's reproductive freedom, that he will repeal ACA and the right to pre-existing conditions, or the right to protect pre-existing conditions, that we will get a majority in the Senate to vote against him. I know it's an uphill fight, but they said we couldn't do it with health care, and we did.
Seriously, dude, I'm telling you, this man did say, and this is where the Enabling Act really, really hit me. Reading through these 33 pages in the Minnesota Law Review that Kavanaugh wrote in 2009, this is not old thought. This is current thought. This is what he believes right now. That if, and this is what he wrote, that if a president finds a law unconstitutional, the president is not required to follow it. Let me say that again. If the president finds a law unconstitutional, he doesn't have an obligation to follow it. That's what the Enabling Act said. It told Adolf that if his Reichstag, his Congress, didn't, think that he had the right to do something because it violated the German Constitution, he didn't have an obligation to follow it. And of course, we all know that Adolf did not follow the German Constitution. He did what he wanted to do. That is shockingly sick. That has nothing to do with upholding the Constitution. That is exactly saying if you want to ignore it, you can. You can ignore the freaking Constitution. I'm telling you right now, you owe it to yourself, no matter what. Like I said, the right-wing, religious groups, they're anti this guy as much as I am. because they know he's unreliable, and they want someone that's going to definitely rule against privacy rights, rule against, gay marriage. This is what, they want. And they don't know if they could trust him because this guy is a shapeshifter. This guy is look, let me put it this way. You're used to the idea that lawyers can argue both sides of a case, right? Anybody that's ever gone to law school knows that you're supposed to be able to argue both sides of a case, because in a trial court, your audience is the jury, and in some cases, a judge. And so you want to, they say when the law's not on your side, argue the facts. When the facts aren't on your side, argue the law. And when both are not on your side, pound your fist on the table, right? So that's what lawyers are trained to do, because their audience is a jury or a judge. But this is a different occupation, Supreme Court Justice. The only audience is the Constitution of the United States. And when you have a guy who can argue both sides of the Constitution, meaning he thinks there are two sides to the Constitution and there aren't, and that is why most Supreme Court justices, even when they're appointed by a Ronald Reagan, like a Justice Souter, even like, Judge Roberts, who was appointed by W, found that the ACA was constitutional after all. See, that's why they find for democratic, principles, and I say that small d, more often than they find for conservative principles, because the Constitution itself is a democratic document. It's a progressive document. It says in order to create a more perfect union, meaning it was always forward-looking. It always assumed. That's why in the Constitution, there's a prescription for how to amend the Constitution. That's why in the Constitution, there's redress of grievances, okay? Because they understood that it needed to be more perfect than it was when they adopted it, and we still had slaves as, human beings as chattel. Chattel freaking slavery, and they understood they couldn't fix it then, or they thought they couldn't, and so they left it for future generations. The Constitution is a living, breathing document. It is a progressive document. It is a democratic document. It was meant to expand and grow as we as a country expand and grow. These people on the right, they think that the Constitution is a conservative document, and the proof is in the pudding. Once people are on the Supreme Court, even Anthony Kennedy, they will say things that they can't, they can't change. They'll say things like, we're not going to deal with this here. We don't take this up now. We're not commenting on that here. This is for another day, right? And kick it someplace else. Kick the can down the road. This guy will not do that. This guy is giving the 5-4 majority the rationale, the roadmap to say the Constitution is not a living, breathing document. The Constitution can be bent, it could be twisted, it could be shaped to serve this guy, but not that guy. We can do this for Trump right now and get the Mueller investigation shut down. And then later, if we have a Democratic president, we can, reverse ourselves and we can investigate the hell out of him. And we can indict him, and we could do, subpoenas or whatever. I'll find a way. That's sick. That's sick. And that's why this guy has to be defeated. And the way to defeat him is really pretty simple. Can it happen? Yes. Will it happen? I don't know. But every single Democrat, everyone, Heidi Heitkamp included, Donnelly in Indiana included, Senator Dean Heller in Arizona, okay, Republican included. You got, if you could keep the Democratic minority together, and they could speak in one voice that this man is not trustworthy. He doesn't have reverence for the Constitution or the written words of it, that he has been on both sides of every case, which might be fine for a lawyer, but is not the occupation of a Supreme Court justice, that he is inconsistent, that he finds against Democratic presidents' investigations, and that he finds that an investigation into a Republican president is repugnant and a distraction. If you could hold all the Democrats together on that principle, and you could convince a Dean Heller or a Susan Collins or a Lisa Murkowski to vote no, then this fails. And it will fail spectacularly, and it will fail right before the election. This man cannot go forward. I'm so sorry. Go back to coaching your kids, because you're very lucky. You're very lucky that in this particular instance, you have your children with you. The idea that a president who is separating children from their families at this exact moment in time, missing a court deadline to reunify the under fives with their parents today, and that Kavanaugh supposedly loves children so much that he would accept a nomination from a man like that, tells you everything you need to know about his careerist mentality over principle. Because if anybody had any principles at this point in time, and they were being asked to be a judge by Donald Trump, and they had children, they would say no. And they would make it a big damn deal. Rick in Los Angeles.
Hey, Randy.
Hi.
Yeah, this guy is he's like the creature from the Black Frickin' Lagoon.
He's his own ecosystem, man. This guy, you stand next to him, you'll get mosquito bites.
Exactly. He has nothing on the cave there in Thailand, 2.5 miles down where all those boys were rescued. But,
I'm telling you, he shoved himself so far up Trump's ass, I really thought we were going to need Navy SEALs.
Yeah, no kidding. And, this is like deja vu all over again. Like about, 12, 13 years ago, the Bush administration's mantra during, I think, the Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Alito and then first Roberts, then Alito, was, all about the unitary executive. That basically the executive can do whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah.
He can
torture. He can black site. He can disappear people. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If he doesn't like the way a law is written, he can just do signing statements.
Oh, right.
The law,
And Kavanaugh talks about signing statements in this, lovely little piece here.
Oh, does he? I'll have to read it. I haven't had a chance.
Oh, you have to. I'm so sorry, everybody, but these are 33 pages, and you know what? They're only half pages because when you write like this, half the page is what you're writing, and then below are all these footnotes. So
yeah, that's easy.
It's really only 15 pages of reading.
Yeah, and just for the non-lawyers in the audience, Randy, the key is to first read the text of the article and skip the footnotes the first time around, and then once you've read the text, go back and just scan the footnotes and see which ones seem to be apt, let's say.
Yep. Yep.
That's how it's done, to get through the stuff. But, this guy is a real, this guy is a real piece of work. Clearly, Deadbeat Donnie selected him because he wants him to help shut down the Mueller investigation.
I'm telling you, the backroom boys, the shadowy guys, we used to call it the smoke-filled backrooms, they only gave Donald Trump these 33 pages. That's all they gave him. And he said, ooh, look at this. This guy doesn't think that the president or anybody around the president should be questioned in even criminal situations. So he said, that's my guy. And the backroom boys wanted this guy. Yeah. They wanted this guy because this guy protects Republicans at all costs and investigates the crap out of Democrats and changes the rules for Democrats, when they're president, as in countenances just about anything, including torture, including, no stem cell research because, the babies, right? He'll do anything he needs to. Right, the snowflakes.
Babies.
Snowflake babies, right. Mm-hmm.
These guys, who selected this nominee. They're clearly the Barons in the balcony and the Donald Henley song working it, you know?
Yeah.
And they basically are hoping that, you know, by feeding the Trumpanzees or the maggots, whatever you want to call them, all this intellectual horsecrap, that they're going to placate them, you know?
I know.
That's the whole idea.
I know.
So,
listen.
anyway, great show, Randy.
Thank you, honey. Honest to God, man, this cannot happen. It just can't. This is exactly the kind of swamp thing that you don't want sitting on the Supreme Court. Okay, we all know Alito and Roberts were corporate maven. You know, they would always rule for the corporation over the worker, over the little people. And look what's happened to our right to organize, et cetera, et cetera. And look what's happened to our pay and wages. This is worse.
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
Do you consider Roe v. Wade to be an abomination? And do you consider yourself to be a judicial nominee, like the president said he was going to nominate people in the mold of Scalia and Thomas?
Senator, on the question of Roe v. Wade, if confirmed to the D.C. Circuit, I would follow Roe v. Wade faithfully and fully. That would be binding precedent in the court. It's been decided by the Supreme Court.
As to your own opinion.
And I'm saying if I were confirmed to the D.C. Circuit, Senator, I would follow it. It's been reaffirmed many times, including in Planned Parenthood versus
I understand, but what is your opinion? You're not on the bench yet. You've talked about these issues in the past to other people, I'm sure.
The Supreme Court has held repeatedly, Senator, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to give a personal
not going to answer
view
the
on
question.
that case.
Okay, so that was Kavanaugh right there when he was being confirmed to the D.C. Circuit. And, of course, here's the little thing that you have to understand. This is why I'm saying being a Supreme Court justice is a different occupation than being any other kind of judge, being any other kind of attorney, okay? Because he was on a circuit court. Of course, he has to defer to Supreme Court precedent. But if you're on the Supreme Court, you can ignore precedent and you can be a snake like him and you can say, well, just because we had the Heller decision, or not the Heller decision, you know, in the Heller decision, they overturned the longstanding principle that there was no Second Amendment right without being a member of a militia, right? That you had to be a militia member and that you had to be reporting for muster and you had to have your weapons inspected in order to have a Second Amendment right. And that was the law of the land, and people relied on that law for years and years and years and years and years. And then all of a sudden we had Antonin Scalia, and he changed the precedent, and he said, oh, well, you know, just because people relied on the fact that you had to be a militia member since, you know, the inception of this country doesn't mean that, you know, you should, still use that precedent. I'm going to say that you have a right to own a weapon. Not any weapon. Not every weapon. Can't have a bazooka. But you could have a handgun. You could have whatever you want, you know, like that. This is that guy. This is that guy. Now, when they questioned him as a appeals court judge, of course he said, well, the Supreme Court has, you know, held that a woman has a right to privacy. And so the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court. Yes, but what do you think? And, of course, he won't answer because what he thinks is the most important thing, because he is now looking to be a Supreme Court justice, which is a completely different occupation than an appeals court judge, a completely different occupation than a district court judge, and totally unhooked, unhinged from being a trial court lawyer. Right? Right. I hope you understand. Larry in Lake Elsinore.
Randy.
Hey.
Hey. Say, you know, you were talking earlier about the writings of, or the undoings of the German Congress by Adolf Hitler. You know, there's a lot of people may or may not know that in the Vanity Fair interview with Ivana Trump, Donald's first wife, she had actually said that Donald would keep a book of famous Hitler speeches next to his bed, and that's what was his so-called reading material before he went to sleep.
Yeah, he's a very big admirer of propaganda, and we know that because that's how Donald Trump became Donald Trump. Remember, Donald Trump used to impersonate a PR person, right? He had two different names, and he would put stories about himself into the newspapers, into Page Six, and into People Magazine, and into all of these little Forbes, all these magazines. Donald Trump is a master of propaganda, and that's because he studied it. He loves it.
Yeah, if he read anything, it was the propaganda. The other question I have that hasn't really been, brought to the surface, taking into consideration that Donald Trump could very well be, as it's been stated, he could be a Russian asset.
Yeah.
And possibly even conspired with Russia for him to become the president. If he was found guilty of that, that means he would have been actually an illegitimate president. The whole administration and the presidency, every bill that he ever signed, every executive order that he signed would also be in the same.
No.
They would all be fraudulent.
No.
So my question is because it's never been done before, the real question is, what would happen? Could it all be unraveled?
No.
Even from an illegitimate president that conspired?
No, because things like the tax code and the giving away $1.3 trillion to the wealthiest man, all that was done with two branches of government. So no.
Yeah, but illegitimate president signed it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And first of all, I got to say, he will never ever be an illegitimate president. He might be a president who violated the laws, a president who obviously currently is violating the emoluments clause because he's getting rich being president, and he's taking foreign money because he's got foreign property, right? And so he's still making money off of his foreign property as president, which is violative of the Constitution. So that's number one. Number two, if he got help from the Russians, it doesn't change the outcome of the election. Okay, maybe America needs to have a propaganda law, but which I believe it does. But the president is not illegitimate in that the states chose the electors. They selected the manner in which they would choose their electors. They chose a vote, and enough electoral votes were won by Donald Trump. So he would never be considered illegitimate. He might be considered a traitor. He might be considered somebody who, participated in collusion or in a conspiracy. He might be somebody that, propagandized within the United States. He might be somebody that committed an act of treason but he will not be an illegitimate president. He was duly elected and sworn in.
Yeah, much to our dismay.
Yeah,
anyway,
but that's the point. The point is that, he's not illegitimate. He may be, a criminal. And he may be guilty of damaging people in the civil setting. In the criminal setting, he may be prosecutable because he engaged in a conspiracy to defraud the United States. But he's not illegitimate.
And if he has his way with this Supreme Court judge that he's proposing,
he'll make it all go away.
Yeah, they could change all the laws, and he'll come out smelling like roses.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Well, another cheerful day in Lake Elsinore.
Yes, but it is cheerful in that the way to do this is very simple and straightforward, and that is every single member of the Senate. I don't care if red states, this whole thing about, Heidi Heitkamp is in a red state, and if she votes against Donald Trump's Supreme Court, bull crap. Nobody has ever been kicked out of office for voting or not voting for a Supreme Court justice. It doesn't happen that way. That's just not true.
Well, the other thing to what you're saying is also the fact that It doesn't matter because he's going to go after her whether she votes for him or not.
Exactly. So if
So,
she,
I mean, what,
so if she
she's stupid
thinks,
not to.
if she thinks that he's going to stop going to her state, or if John Tester thinks that he's going to stop bugging John Tester or campaigning against John Tester in Montana, or I mean they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong.
I know.
He's never going to reward any kind of loyalty. It's a one-way street with him. And, he's still going to campaign against Heidi Heitkamp. He's still going to campaign against John Tester. He's still going to campaign against Claire McCaskill in Missouri. He's still going to campaign against, Joe Manchin in West Virginia. So to give him the vote that he wants the most on this so he can make his investigation go away is just plain stupid.
Yep.
Okay, so that being said, they all stick together. They vote no. This is not the right guy. This is a Harriet Miers pick. This is a Judge Bork pick. This is just a crazy Donald Trump pick that the American people are going to have to live with for the next 40 years. I'm sorry, it's not worth it. I can't give you my vote. And then you get Dean Heller, you get a Corker, you get a Murkowski and a Collins, and it's done.
And those would be real patriots. Anybody who would vote against him would be a real patriot.
Well, I had this little fantasy last night before I, actually shut my little eyes. And I said to Howard, wouldn't it be something if John McCain could get himself in, decent shape to where he was able to get on a plane and fly back to Washington. And he could give the thumbs down to this guy once and for all. And, he would be a hero. I mean, we would forgive him for Sarah Palin. You know what I mean?
Isn't that what Ted Kennedy did?
However, today McCain tweeted that Judge Kavanaugh is a mainstream pick.
Oh, shit.
Right. So forget that. That was my fantasy, though.
Good fantasy, but unfortunate.
It's political porn.
Yeah?
Yeah. Because it'll never happen. All right. Jahari in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Jahari.
Randy, how you doing?
Good.
I haven't talked to you in a couple of years.
I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's been a while. I was out testing my new rig, my fishing rig, listening to you, and you were on fire today.
Oh, thank you.
But I mean, just listening to what this guy wrote. I mean, basically, he's arguing that. I know you used to watch Dexter, so basically, he's arguing that America could elect Dexter. Dexter could continue whacking people in storage sheds with Secret Service protection. They know about it, and he could get away with it, even though he's been found out because the president's too busy.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
I mean, no, I'm sorry. I can't go with that. And I don't think the American people could go with that. If you wrap it up just like that, and that is exactly how I plan to put this to people when I talk about this guy. Just imagine electing Dexter or John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, Larry Nassar, Joe Paterno,
Donald
Jerry Sandusky, anybody. Yeah, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, Jim Jordan,
but
Denny Hastert. I mean, these are people. Donald Trump has said he liked to go into the Miss Teen USA pageant to see the naked teens. Jim Jordan,
right?
There's evidence now, or testimony now, that Jim Jordan was in the showers and saw all these other right, and that they were all watching while this happened. And and Denny Hastert was the Speaker of the House. He was a pedophile that stayed Speaker of the House for years and years and years. I mean, please, it's not fantastical to imagine that you get a pedophile or that you get a person who believes he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and does it, and that this man could get protection from the swamp creatures because they protect each other.
Right.
It's
but here's the
happened
difference
already.
here's the difference between Donald Trump, Hastert, Jim Jordan, and Jim Jordan. When you use like a pop culture reference that everybody can wrap their head around, when you use like a notorious serial killer or someone like a Dexter that everyone knows about, and you make it plain to them in that kind of way and say, yeah, Dexter could keep whacking people and he'd totally get away with it even after he was busted for it. He was caught for it. That kind of makes him think about it. Now, I'm of the mind that that a sitting president should be able to be indicted as a further Article 3 check on the executive, because it tees up not only if a sitting president knows that they've got that hanging over their head, they'd be less inclined to commit a crime.
Yes.
I mean, they'd probably try to still do it.
You want to talk about a deterrent? That would be a good deterrent.
Right, but it also tees up impeachment for Article 1 in Congress. You could say, I mean, if a grand jury hands down an indictment and indicts a sitting president, Congress would say, well, you've been indicted by a grand jury.
And now you must be impeached.
This is the evidence that they saw, and now you got to be impeached.
Yeah.
That's the way that has to be done. And Kavanaugh laid the template for that by saying in that piece that Congress should write a law, but not to protect the president, but to say that he can be indicted.
Well, I don't know that we needed a law to say that the judicial system works for the president as well as all the other citizens. I don't know that we need a new law. I think it should be on its face, not just that the president bears the burden that we all share as citizens of this country to obey the law, but that he ought to be a model of what that looks like. And that the penalty for a president with those awesome powers to change your daily life by declaring war or impounding, or separating women and children and interning Japanese, that a president is a super citizen and therefore has a super obligation to stay within the law. And the law says, first of all, you can't enrich yourself as president. Now, why would they put that in there? Because if a president enriched himself, they wanted him removed. And that was the least of it, okay? The president is a citizen. Buy a stinking podcast.